Hi there, Lindsay here, the Frugal Crafter. Today we're going to do a ink and wash type demonstration. We are going to sketch with a fine liner that's waterproof. You could also use a dip pen if you want to, or you could just sketch this in pencil. And then we're going to do some watercolor wash on top. This video is brought to you by jerrysartarama.com. Today I'm going to use the Lucas watercolors. I had used Holbein in my practice here, but then I realized Holbein paints have gotten so crazy expensive lately that I want to recommend a very similar paint that was better for your budget. So we're going to be using the Lucas brand today. I will have them linked down below to our sponsor, jerrysartarama.com. And I'm also going to be using a number 8 Mimic. This is a faux squirrel round brush, and it comes to a really nice point, so I'll be able to get the broader washes and also the details with this. And we're also going to use a white Posca pen or a white gel pen, depending on what you have. Now, if you want, you can go ahead and sketch with a pencil first and then go over your lines with a pen, but I'm going to go right in with a pen. And my reference photos are coming from this book here, The Artist Photo Reference Flowers. I love this series of books. It's out of print, but you can find used copies on Amazon, and I picked mine up when I found good prices on them. So there's a couple really good images of fuchsia flowers and buds that I'll be piecing together to make our illustration today. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to use a 0.01 micron here. This is one from the maker Bienyo. Well, just make sure whatever you use is waterproof and you're fine. And I'm starting with this fine tip one just so I can kind of sketch loosely and any stray marks won't really be that noticeable. Since I know I want to have a big flower in, I'm going to try to work that like over here on this half of the paper. And I'm going to start with the kind of skirt of the fuchsia. And I'm just going to try to keep my lines as accurate as I can. So when I'm sketching like this with a pen, what I like to do is kind of look back and forth from my reference material to my pad of paper constantly. I don't want to have a bunch of hairy lines. My practice piece was a little sloppy, but I still thought it looked pretty nice. So I thought, you know, even if it's sloppy, I think it still looks kind of pretty. So I thought I would just go with it. And I want to have a couple petals kind of coming out like that. And we'll do one on this side like that. Just trying to keep my lines nice and fluid. And this is kind of nice as far as just meditating and just letting the marks fall and letting the strokes just go however you want. I'm going to get the stamens here. And you can draw a double line or not, that's up to you. They remind me of little ballerinas when I see a fuchsia flower. And you're gonna put these petals up here. It's almost like hands going, yay! Whenever I see that, that's what it makes me think of. The flower is like, yay, it's spring! That's how I feel too, flower. Okay, get one up here too. Try to be symmetrical. It doesn't have to be perfectly symmetrical, but you want to be balanced anyway. And we've got this almost bell shape up here. Okay, so it looks like kind of like a bell. And then we got our stem. These fuchsia flowers they hang down. And let's see, can we see any of the little petals? Yeah, we can have one kind of poking up back there. Alright, so there we have that big fuchsia. Now I want to have a couple of buds. And let's see, I think I want one. Let's see, I think I want one, maybe one low. Maybe I'll do one higher and one lower. I'm just trying to think of like how do I want my composition to go. Let me put one over here first to fill the space, and then I'll figure out if I want the other one to be higher or lower. So I'm going to put one over here. It's going to be kind of like an almond shape. like a Christmas bulb, kind of like a Christmas bulb. Now the reason I'm going in with a smaller, a finer pen first, finer tip pen first, is because I know if I make an error, it's not going to be that big of a deal. So like I did make a mistake on this one. I didn't have that second little hump on the bell. So you have that and you have another one, just like you have that and another one. And this open part here is what that would be. I forgot to put that little bump up there. So making sure that I do that this time. And before I put too much on there, I want to do some little kind of almost like heart shape leaves. So it is a little bit like a connect the dots kind of. Now let's see. I think I do want this next one hanging down a little bit lower. Now here I'm working on a Strathmore greeting card. And I buy these packs in bulk because they work out to be about 30 cents a card. I mean, you can't make a stamped or crafted card for that price. This other one right in there. And we'll get a couple little leaves. All right, now that I've got a bit of confidence because I've got my basic lines down, I'm going to go in with a thicker tip. I think I'll go with a 0.5. I believe that's millimeters, 0.5. And I am going to go in and I'm going to shore up some of these lines, give them a little bit more. Like that one, I think I'm going to actually fatten this guy up a little bit here. And also give this kind of some of the separation of the segments of the petals, because all the petals are kind of closed up in their bud right there. Maybe I'll fatten it up a little, another rib out there. So once you've got that confidence of, okay, I've got my basic line down, now I can go in a little bit more confidently. I would try to avoid resting your hand on your paper. I know I'm doing that. You could put a piece of like typing paper down or something so you don't transfer any lotion or oils from your skin onto your paper. Generally, I'm sitting a little differently when I'm filming. I'm kind of have the artwork away from me a little bit more than I typically would, just so the camera can see it. My head won't be in the way. So, you know, just try to get yourself comfortable when you're doing this. And I just want to get the lines a little bit more shored up. And you can have it very outlined. It's completely up to you how much outlining you have, how dark your lines are. That's really a personal preference. It's nice to have a variety, I think. I had a pretty turn in my leaf over there. I didn't do that on this one. Maybe I'll add a little bit of a turn. I think I can add a little bit of a turn if I pull that up just a little bit, and then I can add a little turn there. I think that's pretty. I like to have some like petals with a little bit of a flip happening because it's just gives you a little bit of an interesting look. You know, so if I just do that, just by adding an extra little line, I get kind of like a little ruffle happening, and I think that's kind of pretty. Now something else you might want to do is some shading with your pen, because that's going to take take a little of the effort off of your watercoloring, which means you won't have to do as much glazing with your watercolors. And you know, you could always go find like a botanical illustration, and you could always print it off, and you could trace the image with a waterproof pen on your watercolor paper if you don't feel like you want to draw it freehand. So now I'm going to go in, I think I'll go with a 0.3, and I'm going to do some shading, and I'm just going to do hatching, not cross hatching, but just hatching, which is where you put the parallel lines in. Any place you would have kind of a shadow, like where petals overlap, any place you have like a bump on the petal, that generally kind of means you have you have like a fold and you'd have a little ripple. Now your paper is going to have some texture to it, so just kind of keep in mind you might end up having some of your lines skip along the texture, especially if you're using a really fine nib pen. And I really like to shadow like the bumps here on the bell. Give it some dimension. Especially on the outside, it will help it come forward a little bit. And it helps give you some kind of like the feeling of there being like veins and wrinkles in the flower. I like to add some shadow. I like to add some hatching like in the separation of these little segments on the buds. And any place you're next to something that's overlapping, so the thing underneath would generally get some shadow. When you're using a waterproof pen like a Micron on watercolor paper, and it could be a Pitt Artist pen, it could be a Sakura Micron, it could be a Biennial Micron, doesn't matter, a waterproof pen. You want to make sure you give that plenty of time to dry or you heat set it. Watercolor paper does not let the ink soak in like it would on another type of paper. That sizing is going to keep it at the surface. So if you don't heat set it or you don't give it an appropriate amount of time to dry, it will, the ink that's not dry yet is going to move on you. So that's a really important step. You don't want to spend a long time on a sketch and then have it bleed on you. I just keep a little heat tool plugged in next to my desk. This is a Ranger heat tool. I like it because, see, when I'm running it, it's not very loud. So if you're crafting in a space with your family, maybe they're watching TV, it's not going to bother anybody. It's nice and quiet. Much quieter than a hairdryer, but a hairdryer will work just to make sure you have that ink completely dry. And this is the same type of tool that if you were a rubber stamper, you could use for like setting your ink or heat embossing, that sort of thing. I'm just working on a silicone mat here so I don't have to worry about damaging anything with the heat. Alright, and there we go. Now if you want to put more detail in there, please feel free to. I didn't want to spend an hour sketching. I love to get to the painting. Now as you can see, I've swatched my watercolors here so I can see what I have. I think that's a really smart idea, especially if you're using watercolors, and especially if it's an artist grade watercolor, because if you look, you'll notice that a lot of the colors look super dark in their pans, and by having it swatched out, you can see what you really have. And then it's a lot easier to paint. And then when you are painting, it can be confusing if you have a big palette like this. Some people like to take out the pans of color as they're working so that they don't get confused with how many colors they have. So I usually don't, but if you do find you're in that situation, then feel free to. So the first color we are going to use is, we're going to use a permanent Alizarin Crimson. And that is a cool type of red. You could use a quinacridone rose as well. And I like to get some on my palette. And I'm going to add a little more water to that. Now you can pre-wet your paper if you want to, or you can just go right in. I'm just going to go right in with a thin glaze. And this is great if you're working on a less expensive paper. These Strathmore greeting cards are not expensive. And what I really like about them is that you can finish up, especially if you're, if you're someone, well, for a couple reasons. If you're someone who wants to have very practical projects, this is very practical because you finish it up and then you can send it away. You can send it to a loved one, send it to a friend, write a note. If you're someone who constantly judges their work and is kind of hard on yourself, if you paint on a watercolor green card, then you can send it away. and you don't look at it again. You don't keep comparing yourself. I actually like keeping a sketchbook, and I like to look through and see how far I've come, like with a certain technique or whatnot. But if you're someone who like gets frustrated, you know, we'll look back at other stuff and be like, oh, that looks awful. I just want to rip that out of my sketchbook and throw it away. Put it on a card, mail it off. I guarantee you nobody's going to say, oh, that's not very good. Absolutely not. Now, if you want to pre-wet, I'm going to show you a method over here. I'm going to wet this bud. Now, if I hadn't have heat set this ink might be spreading. It is a waterproof ink, but you've got to make sure you give it time to dry. I want to stress that because I have so many times been impatient, or like I'm sitting on the couch and I don't want to go and dry it. I just want to get to the fun part, and then I end up smearing it. So I just wanted to make sure that I really stress that. All right, so we're going to use a couple colors here. We're actually going to use a green. I think I'll use a sap green. I really like a sap green. That's not sap green. That's green gold. We want a sap green. It's down here. See how it can be confusing if you have a bunch of colors? The sap or an olive green, something like that. I'm going to add that to the bottom, and I'm going to add it up here into this top part of the bell and up into the stem. Because sometimes you want a more soft blend, especially when you have really defined lines, because you can afford to go a little, have a little fun, go a little crazy with your color when you have those defined lines, right? I'm going to get a little rag here to blot my brush. I'm just going to spread that out a little bit. Now you can kind of play with how intense your color is. So we did wet into wet. We had wet paper and we had wet paint, and we let them blend together. But you can also do kind of a dry paint onto wet, and that's a really nice technique for getting those soft shadows. So I'm drying my brush off. I'm going to go right to that pan of a crimson paint, and I'm going to pick up the color. So I cleaned my brush, I blotted it, and I just wiped my brush over the pan so I'd pick up an intense color. And I'm going to go in and just go over those shadowy areas. Okay, now I can even let's do a little bit more of that red. See when I put it on my palette how the stroke just stays, it doesn't beat up or anything. By the way, if you're having a problem with your palette beating up, wash it well. You can use a magic eraser. I find just the more you use it and the more you've washed it and the more you've gotten it dirty, it removes any of that residue from the factory that might make it kind of resist your paint and make it beat up. So the more you use it, the better it's going to get, basically. So now I also want to add another dimension. I'm going to add some dioxazine violet. I'm going to add it right into that with the red on my brush, dirty brush, and very little water. And I'm going to go in and do another bit of shadow here. And look at all this work I'm getting done in this one first layer. I might not even want to go in and add any more layers in the future. Oh, you know what? I forgot to put any dewdrops. I want to put a few dewdrops on. I'm going to go back and grab my pen. I'll have to sketch them on after that dries. But let's put one there. Let's put one there. Let's do at least 3. But you know what? Maybe I'll just do a third one. Oh, let's do one that's kind of rising up over that. There we go. Okay, you know what? We're going to blast that with the heat tool real quick. I had forgotten I did that on my sketch there, and I'm like, I like the way dewdrops look. I think it's kind of pretty. So now look at the dimension that has versus that. Now I could have done that over here. I could have done that wet into wet shading. But when I'm doing the shading on the petals, I'm going to want a little bit more of a crisp look. So that's kind of why I chose to do it differently. And I can do some glazing on that as well. All right, I just want to make sure those dewdrops get dry before I go over them. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean about the glazing. I usually will do one layer and everything and then do glazing, but since I just brought it up, I thought I'll show you that right now too. I'm just going to grab some of that, more of that crimson. And honestly, you could use whatever watercolors you have, because you have that nice strong, the strong line work. You wouldn't want watercolor that's really chalky though, because if your paint's really chalky, it's going to cover up a lot of those lines. So that's something you want to just be aware of. But it just makes those petals look a little bit smoother and crisper when you do a shadow like that. I also like to put my my stronger color where I have had the hatching. It's kind of like if you like to watercolor and rubber stamp designs, you generally would put your shading where the stamp artist has put the darker hatching or stippling. Okay, so now I'm going to go down to this petal here. I'm pulling that red in there, but I'm going to go in with some purple. I'm just going to grab some of that violet, dioxazine violet, right on my palette. And this will probably be one of the darker areas because it's got two petals overlapping it. And honestly, the techniques you would use for coloring this would be very similar to how you would rubber stamp, because you would have that inked artwork already. You can find really beautiful illustrations that are like from old seed catalogs. They would be really pretty to trace for this technique. Or if you had a laser printer, you could print it right out on your watercolor paper. I don't have a laser printer, so... But I like to draw anyway, so it's up to you. Do what you want to do. Your art should bring you joy. I'm going to pull a little bit of that color up into that dewdrop. But notice I left some white in there. I wanted to catch some light, so I just kind of left some white. Some more of that color. Now remember, I'm going to go right over the dewdrop on this one. Remember, it is easier to dull a color down than it is to brighten it up. So when in doubt, keep it brighter. You can always glaze over it to dull it down if it's too bright. If you get any puddles, blot your brush off and then go back in and just kind of soak it up. Now I'm going to want it darker in there, but I don't want to do that wet into wet, because if I do it wet into wet, it's going to bleed, and I'm going to want a crisp line right there, okay? So that's why I wouldn't want to do that right now. But what I do want to do is take a little color out of the dewdrop. So to do that, I'm going to blot my brush off, and I'm going to just lift up some of that color with my dry brush. There we go. It brightens it right up. It's not pure white, but that's all right. I don't want it pure white, but I do want to brighten it up a little bit. Okay, let's see. I don't want to go right next to a petal that's wet. I think I'm going to go up here and take some sap green. This might actually be olive green. Let me take a quick peek. That's actually olive green. That's what Lucas calls olive green. Looks like a lot of sap greens. And I'm going to color this. My brush was a little wet, so I just dabbed it. Now I'm going to go right ahead and add some different... Oops, I added I should have more red there. You know what? I'm just going to, since it's not too dark, blot my brush off. I'm going to grab some crimson. I'm going to go right in there with the crimson and let it wick right up. There. Oh, that's pretty. I love that little blush, of color, because a lot of times you see that in plants. You'll see that kind of really soft rush of color. Be careful you don't drip water on your paper. And let's see, I'll do a little bit more green there. I'm going to go over here. I'm going to do some green on these. I'm going to add the color. Now this is a fade out, so I'm adding the color where I want it darkest. Then I'm going to clean my brush and just blot off the excess on my rag there, and I'm just gonna use my tip of my wet brush to pull some color out to color the rest of the petal. This is so pretty when you're doing it over pen and ink, because you really don't want to overdo your paint because you spend the time coloring with your pen, so you want that to show. Now we're going to do this whole one in one layer. This is going to be fun. So you've gotten a little practice. Don't be afraid. This is also one that's pushed behind something, so it's not our focal point. So if it doesn't come out absolutely perfect, you don't have to worry about it. So my brush is clean. I'm just blotted the ferrule. This is that metal part, get any drips off there. And I am going to wet the stem, the leaves, and the bud. And if you need to reload your brush, just tip the bottom half of the bristles in the water so you don't get water up on the ferrule. Just be careful when you're going over when you're going next to other petals and at the edges. You don't want to get outside of the lines because then we're working on a white background here, so we want to make sure that our lines stay really crisp and nice. And you could go over it with a white pen afterwards, but if your white pen doesn't exactly match the color of your watercolor paper, then it will look a little sloppy. And you don't have to go right up to the edge if you don't want to. And you know, the benefit of this, I'm working on a cellulose paper, which is less expensive than a cotton paper, but I find that if your paint's drying, it dries, I feel like the paint sits on top of the paper a little bit longer, so you can kind of keep that wet area for blending a little bit better. I'm going to start off with our olive green or sap green, whatever you're using. Pretty pasty. I mean, this is so you can see the texture of it. It's about like cream, probably. And we're going to start that up here. And we're going to put some in the tip. And then we're going to clean our brush. We're going to go in with a crimson. Oops, that's my brush is too wet there. I'm going to blot that off a bit. I like the Lucas Crimson because it's a permanent Alizarin Crimson. It's a quinacridone based color. I believe it's quinacridone based. It's not going to fade on you, and it's got a beautiful clarity, and it mixes really well. The thing I also really like about the Lucas line is that there's either no or minimal oxgall in it, so you can add more if you want your paint to flow more. It's a nice, easy to control paint. And that's why I decided to use it in place of Holbein here. The Turners would also be a nice option. I think the Turners are a little bit even more transparent than these. Oh, I like that. Okay, so if I want to add a highlight, if I feel like that's too dark in the middle, now remember it's watercolor and this is quite wet, so it's going to go a little bit lighter. I can just wipe my brush off and I can lift out in the centers of these segments. I can pick up more of that red on my brush, really thick, and some of that purple, the dioxazine violet there. We haven't used a lot of colors, you know. And I can go in and add my shading right into the wet paper. Make sure you're crisp up against the neighboring shapes. That's darker than I thought it was going to be. I'm actually going to grab a little bit more of the red on its own, but I'm going to blot my brush really well. I just feel like it's too dark in from going from the shadows to the middle, so I'm just going to go in with some crimson as well. And I'm going to grab a little more green. I'm bringing my hand over so I don't like bring my brush back to my hand with the rag in it and then drip on my paper. So that's why I'm doing it. I know it probably looks a little awkward. I'm trying to keep everything where you can see it. I want a little bit more green there. You do want to work this while everything is damp. And you want your brush drier as you go so you don't make a wetter spot, because the wetter spots lead to puddles. And then if you need to soften something, clean your brush, blot it so it's almost dry, just a little bit damp, because you don't want to have more water on your brush than your paper at this point, because then you're going to you'll drop paint in there and that's going to cause your cauliflower effect. There, and so we did a bunch of work there in one go. Now I do want to lift out the dewdrop a little bit. So again, blot my brush, I'm going to go in there and just paint that clear water on there and lift it out. Look at that. So easy. Okay, we'll go over and paint those petals purple. Dioxazine violet. You can add a little bit of the crimson to it if it feels too purple to you. And if your purple feels too red, you can add some like ultramarine blue to it. It's such a pretty flower. This would make such a lovely card. Even for like Mother's Day, this would be really pretty too. So if you get a puddle, just blot your brush and go back in and soak up that excess. You can leave little sparkles of white showing like I did there, or you can fill them in. It's up to you. I've got a white pen that I'll be adding for highlights on the dewdrops, so I think I'll fill it in. And then if I want them later, I'll add them in. So we've done so many techniques today, and even though this is a pretty beginner project, you've done some advanced techniques. You've done some glazing, you've done some dry into wet blending, you've done pen and ink. It just goes to show you nothing is too difficult. You just break it down one step at a time, one technique at a time, and you've got this. Now I'm just going to go in, and I'm going to bring some of that color up here into these petals, just doing a little bit of a tip of my brush. Almost doing some line work with this actually, and helping integrate these petals together. I like to clip my paper down onto a scrap of cardboard. This is actually a scrap of mat board, which is really nice because it's acid free. And if I have to leave my paper clipped on, I don't have to worry about like any acid migration or anything like that. And this would be a really nice shadow color for way back here, this little petal. Could do some up here in this little turned around area. Plus, I think it helps when you turn something around, you look at it with fresh eyes. It helps you evaluate it a little bit better. I'm going to throw some of this color in here where you've got the in between. You got this petal underneath. It would be a little bit darker. It's dragging a little bit, so I'm going to pick up some of the more juicy paint. This helps you give the illusion of the petal being kind of folded and bent. It gives you that three-dimensional look. And I'm going to add a little bit. Let's see, those are drying really quick, but it's still a little wet. I can do the shadow on the underturned area there. I've done all this in one brush. A round brush with a point is really your best tool as a watercolorist, I think. And not all brushes have a good point. I really like this number 8 Mimic. I probably use this one more than any of the other ones. They have a couple sets out. They have a value set that's what I reckon. It's what I have, and it's what I recommend. It goes on sale for around $24 to $30 occasionally on Jerry's, and I would definitely grab it if you see it at that price. I'll link to it. Maybe it's on sale. If not, I'm not sure if you can use a coupon on that or not, but I will put a coupon code in the video description for you. So hopefully, if it's not on sale, you can use the coupon on it. But I like it because you have a huge, like a number 2-inch wide, like Skyflow brush. You've got number 8 round. You got a number 30 round, which is so nice. You got a 12 round. They all come to beautiful points. And it's got some liners and spotters too, and a 1-inch flat. It's such a nice all-around set. But this number, I'm telling you, if you can afford one brush, get that number 8 round. That is going to serve you so well because it has such a nice point. It's like you've got a number 8 in every size smaller. So the only thing then you're thinking, why would you ever have those smaller brushes? Well, the thing is, I think a lot of times people like the smaller brush because this holds so much water. It can be a little overwhelming, and if you're not used to it, you could. And if you're not used to it, and say you're using like a student grade color where it's a little bit harder to get enough pigment, you might end up mixing more water into your color or picking up more water and then having your colors too diluted. So that would be a reason why you might not want this brush if you're using a student grade color, or you might want a smaller brush that's not going to hold quite as much water. and this personal preference. I like a bigger brush because I can cover a lot more ground at once. Now I'm going to soften that out like I showed you how to fade it before a few minutes ago. I'm going to rinse my brush. I'm going to blot off the excess. I need a little bit of water, but not much. Just enough to carry that out a little bit. Fade it out so I don't have an outline. I'm going to do the fade. I also want a little shadow underneath here. So people have personal preferences on what kind of brush they want. If you get used to using a bigger brush, it'll help you with your brush control. But I understand if it's just not working out for you, use the brush that's why they make all those different size brushes, because everybody has different needs. There's nothing wrong with it. Use the brush that suits you best. But give a bigger brush a try at least. It might be that you love using bigger brushes, but maybe your bigger brushes are old, you don't want to replace them, but they just don't come to a fine point anymore. Get a smaller brush. It'll be cheaper than buying another bigger brush. You just will have two to do both jobs instead of having one that does both jobs. I want to do a little bit of color inside of that dewdrop. And I don't want too much pigment on here. There we go. A little bit up there in that guy too. I already did the shadow under him. So I need a little shadow under that guy. I need it to be that reddish color, that crimson, with maybe a little smidgen of the violet in there. I try to go back to my mixing area when I just need like a little touch of something, because for one thing, you don't need that much, so you don't want to mix up a bunch and waste it, but also you're better off. You'll get probably a better color that way too. A little shadow in there. So with a dewdrop, you know, let me grab a pad of paper. I want to show you this real quick. I mean, don't excuse my notepad. I mean, we're friends here. I'm not fancy. So we've got our dewdrop, right? Okay. The light is coming from this direction, let's say. That's how it's going to be coming on our picture. This is our dewdrop and it's on a petal. So the dewdrop itself is going to cast a shadow. Okay, actually our lights, probably it's more coming over here. So it's going to cast a shadow. This is going to be dark. Okay, the dewdrop's going to have a highlight on it from that light. Okay, it's going to have a highlight from that light and probably a couple little reflections over there. But then inside the shadow itself, it's going to have some shadow up here underneath that high highlight where it distorts. Where it distorts your, distorts a shadow, it distorts the colors, and it reflects and refracts. So for that bright highlight to show up, you got to have a shadow underneath it, and it's going to cast a shadow below it. And then you're just going to have like little kind of glossy areas where it's catching light again at the bottom of it, and that's going to help show its roundness. So we will do 1, 2, 3 those highlights with a white pen if we need to. We might not even need to on the bottom, but you just need to make sure you have a little shadow underneath them so that it shows up. I hope that makes sense. You know what? I can bring this one up to the camera and show you a little bit better. So if you see there, we've got our light coming from above. It's catching a bright highlight up there at the top of the dewdrop. It's got a couple little reflections, cast reflections there, kind of sparkles there. It's casting a shadow at the bottom of the dewdrop, but the inside of the dewdrop is bright in there where it's caught the light and magnified it. So hopefully that helps you. I do have videos that are just on doing dewdrops. You can look those up if you're interested. You know, I really don't think this needs a heck of a lot. I think we can go ahead and add those dewdrops onto our picture. If you want to play around and do some more highlights, you can. So like here, I'm going to, you know, let's zoom in a little bit. I think that's as zoomed in as we're going to get. We're going to do a little curvy highlight there. And we'll just do a couple little dabs down there. We're going to do a curvy highlight there. And I think I'll just do a little dab there. I'll do a curvy highlight there and a dab there. Oh, you know what? We have to paint the little parts that fall down from the bottom of the flower. They are going to be Crimson until we get to the bottom, and then we'll do a little bit of that. Oh shoot. You know what? Let's show you how to fix a mistake, shall we? I did not mean to do that, and that's crimson that will stain. So what you want to do is grab a little stiff brush. I like to use these little filberts. And I'm just going to go ahead and go right over that, and hopefully I can lift it up. Paper towels work a little bit better for this than a cloth rag. And I can always use my white pen if I need to. Hopefully it did not set. Of course it would be crimson. I think it'll be alright. I don't think it's really going to show after it's all done. There we go. Blot. Don't rub your paper, especially cellulose. You want to just blot. And we're going to avoid painting that for right now. We will do the other ones and then do that one when it's dry. So we're just going to do brush straight up and down, just little little wisps for the stamens, and then we'll do really watered down green for the little dabs on the end. Hummingbirds love these flowers. Actually, I think that's fine. I think I have enough red left over there for it to just leave it the way it is. And there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. It was so much fun. I'll show you the dried version that I have here. It was a little bit bigger. This was on the Strathmore Wind Power paper, and that was on the Strathmore watercolor greeting cards. I think it's Strathmore, pretty sure. I don't know where I set my box of cards. I'll double check. Yes, Strathmore watercolor cards. This is what the box looks like for those. And this is what the Wind Power pad looks like. I really like this, and I like their 400 series in the brown cover. I avoid the yellow cover Strathmore paper because that is really, the texture of it is really weird. It looks like, you know, somebody drove a toy truck over it. I don't like that. But it's a lot of fun. I hope you give it a try, and please leave me a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Thanks for watching. Until next time, happy crafting.